Happy Earth Day. Really nice for you all to join us. It was Rachel Carson who said, "Those who contemplate the beauty of the earth find reserves of strength that will endure as long as life lasts." And that seems like a pretty fitting sentiment for the moment we're in. I'm Vernon Loeb. I'm the executive editor. I spent my career in newspapers covering government and defense and intelligence. I worked for the Washington Post, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the LA Times. I made my way to nonprofit journalism and climate journalism when I watched it rain 54 inches in 2 days during Hurricane Harvey when I was managing editor of the Houston Chronicle. Um, Thanks to your support, we've met the environmental rollbacks and the climate denialism of the past few months with an all staff breaking news effort and a firm commitment to hold the line. We believe deeply reported journalism is one of the strongest civic forces in America, and this is our moment. It's baked into our DNA as a newsroom that we're nonprofit and we're nonpartisan, but we're very clear about the climate crisis. Here's something you'll be reading about on our site tomorrow. The global mean concentration of carbon dioxide increased by 3.75 parts per million from 23 to 24, the largest annual jump measured since monitoring started in the late 1950s. In the past, NOAA would announce this when it was finally calculated, but not this year. Joining me today to talk about what's happening are two of our most experienced and talented reporters, Marianne Lavelle, who's our Washington bureau chief, and Dan Gearino, who covers renewable energy for us and is based in Columbus, Ohio. Marianne worked at National Geographic, U.S. News, the National Law Journal, and the Center for Public Integrity, and she's won the Polk Award and the IRE Award. Dan covered energy for 9 years at the Columbus Dispatch before joining ICN. And this year, Marianne and Dan won a prestigious first place award in economics reporting from the Society for Business Writing and Editing for a series they wrote about EV politics in the run up to the 2024 election. So, Marianne, you've got a story leading our site this morning about President Trump contemplating executive orders that might target the tax-exempt status of climate and environment groups. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, right. We have been hearing about this for a couple of weeks from all different sources and different kinds of sources. What really kind of put it at a level of something we had to write about was the president's own words. He was talking about his administration's moves against Harvard University and how nonprofit status is a privilege. And it's not only Harvard, and we're going to have announcements that are coming out, but we feel, people are abusing their nonprofit status. And he was asked about environmental groups, and he said, could be that they are target of whatever is coming down the pike. And this really meant that we had to write about what was happening in the environmental groups. Already they were meeting and having these big Zoom meetings, meeting with their lawyers to get a sense of what to do if their nonprofit status is attacked. The thing that we felt we could add, having just that cryptic comment from the president, we could add a little bit of the context and the history of why there's a nonprofit sector. And really, this was something Congress did way back in 1917 because Congress felt it was important to have a very strong philanthropic sector in the United States. And of course, for environmentalists on Earth Day, we remember it was really the nonprofit sector that brought to light all of the problems that led to federal environmental laws. We told a little bit of that context and also how there have been efforts before to take away uh, the nonprofit status of different groups. And so we feel we know that the president doesn't have anything on his schedule today as far as executive orders. We don't know what will happen, but it definitely has had an impact among the groups that have been at the front line in really holding the administration to account on the rollback of environmental protections.
And how nervous are they, do you think?
They're very they're very nervous, but also I would say the ones we talk to, and you can read it in our stories, they're very determined and they feel that the law is very much on their side and is very, we do have this long history of in addition to the First Amendment, uh, it- law really promoting and protecting the nonprofit sector. And so I think they're confident, but that doesn't mean just because they're confident that they would win a legal battle doesn't mean that it hasn't shaken up uh, the whole sector.
Is it possible that this might include nonprofit newsrooms that report on climate?
I think one source of mine said everything's on the table. And that's how I think we have to feel. This administration is really pushing the limits of executive authority in ways we've never seen before. I was telling you earlier when we were talking, Trump is the seventh president that I've covered, if you count him only once. And but you almost have to say eight presidents because this presidency is far different than his first presidency, where he was tentative. He had folks on board who were more experienced in Washington and kind of pulled the reins in on what he could do. But this really is a different presidency.
Yeah. I should add that federal law expressly prohibits weaponizing nonprofit statuses and says that a nonprofit status can only be removed after an IRS audit. So whatever happens, it's probably a long way down the road, but we shall see. Um, Dan, President Trump is a pretty much a declared opponent of wind and solar energy, and certainly no fan of EVs. Will his return to the White House doom the transition to renewable energy and kill EVs?
So the answer to that is a pretty emphatic no. What he can do is slow things down. He can discourage investment in the United States for those things. He can make life difficult for developers. Um, but this transition to cleaner forms of energy has a momentum that he can't stop, and it's happening around the world. It's happening in China, it's happening in the European Union. Um, the larger question is, how does the United States fit into that? And how do the decisions being made today affect the US role in the global energy economy of, say, 2040, 2050? And I think a lot of the moves you're seeing under the Trump administration are not helpful for making sure that the United States is a real power player in autos in renewable energy. So you see trade associations and others feel like we're watching the United States kind of hand off influence and to China especially, but also Europe. But yeah, the short answer is you can't. This momentum cannot be stopped. A tremendous amount of energy can be used to slow it down, though. But even I even question how much it can really be slowed down.
Yeah, EV sales were up, were they not, in the first quarter this year?
Yeah, it's interesting that some of that increase may have been attempting to get in ahead of policy changes. So it's like it's hard to know what was driving that. But global EV sales are up. EV sales are, and with the technological improvement you see in batteries, the fact that battery quality is going to be higher, battery ranges are going to be higher, costs are probably going to be lower 5, 6 years down the road, means that regardless of what's happening in terms of sales in the United States, this is going to be a much more attractive product now than it is in the future than it is now. And the gasoline engine is going to be a less attractive product. And you're going to see all of the infrastructure around gasoline vehicles. It's as this transition continues, you're just going to see this shift, and we've seen shifts like this before in our economy when one technology is displacing the other. They coexist for a while, but there will come a point where, in my lifetime, where we look back and we say, "Whoa, we drove gasoline vehicles for a long time. Yeah, that seems kind of weird." I when that point is, I can only guess at this point, but it's definitely coming.
How do the US automakers feel about Trump's reticence with regard to EVs? And how do they feel also about the growing threat posed by China's EV industry?
It's fascinating looking at earnings calls and looking at some of the public statements because auto executives desperately do not want to pick a fight with this administration. At the same time, though, they are clear. They see the transition that's happening. They see that if they are doubling down on gasoline engines while leading markets in the world other than the United States are moving quickly, very quickly toward EVs, there is a risk that the US companies could be left behind. And these are global companies. They sell a lot of cars outside of the United States. Um, you will see trade associations, and then you will see these kind of offhand comments and interviews where auto executives will actually speak their mind. For example, they are petrified at what China could do. If you could have low cost Chinese EVs available in the United States, what that would do to U.S. companies' ability to grab that market share. So it's always a tough time to be an auto executive. It is a somewhat cyclical business, but it's really hard right now, and I don't envy any of those guys.
Yeah. Marianne, I remember this story that you and Dan wrote in your series about EV politics, where you went to South Carolina, bright red South Carolina, and found surprising support for, was it a battery factory or an EV assembly plant there in
It
South
was
Carolina?
it was actually a new EV uh, manufacturing plant. They're going to revive the one of the first SUVs, the Scout. And this is Volkswagen bought the brand and decided it was going to revive it as an electric vehicle. And Central South Carolina is very excited about this. They expect thousands of jobs. And for it to be a real engine of economic development there. I talked to them early in the Trump administration, how are you feeling? It wasn't really clear what direction things were going in quite then, but one thing they've done is they were just going to do an all electric Scout, but now they're going to have hybrid Scouts as well. So they're hedging their bets. uh, will US drivers be ready for the transition? And so this is how they're hedging their bets, or we're doing it just then. Um, they have to keep their eye on what's happening in the US market, and that's going to be very driven by policy.
Yeah. Both of you have also written about a group of House Republicans who have voiced support for the subsidies put forth for things like EVs and renewable energy in Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. So it's also interesting that there is some Republican support for renewables.
A lot of auto related manufacturing, battery plants, etc., moved to red states. It really because there already were supply chains there, and uh, so it really would be harmful to a lot of these districts that are Republican districts. There are, I think it was last count, 18 or 19 House Republicans were on this letter saying they do not want a wholesale rollback of all of these energy tax credits. And they were very careful to say they're 100% behind President Trump's energy policy, but they don't want these tax credits to just be slashed. So we'll see in the coming weeks what really happens. But 18 or 19 House Republicans, that's enough to stop. If they decide to take a stand, that's enough to stop the rollback of those tax credits.
So what's it been like covering Trump's return? You know, people have called it shock and awe, and certainly the explosion of the news cycle has been very loud indeed. How are you coping?
Yeah, with a lot of help from the whole Inside Climate News staff, because everyone in a way is contributing to our coverage of this. But realistically, there's so much happening at once. We have to pick and choose what we can really give some new insights on what readers could not find elsewhere. And so we'll pick and choose a few things that we really go in depth on. One of them was the rollback or the effort to claw back this greenhouse gas reduction fund or green bank, the nation's first green bank, which was started by the Biden administration. And I worked with Dan on that story because at Inside Climate, we always like to uh, not just talk about what's happening in Washington, but how the policy is being felt all across the country. So Dan talked to folks in Indiana who really were counting on that green bank money to help fund an enormous amount of real economic development in that state. And I think we were able to provide a really deep look. I think our story, Dan, what was the headline on that story? It was how we got a green bank,
Yeah.
what it means, and how we may lose it. It's a real explainer that I think will be easy for anyone to really get into and read the impact of what's happening beyond what all of the maneuverings that are happening every day in the courts on that particular effort.
So Dan, is renewable energy getting more or less partisan?
One of the fascinating things about covering this is that it is simultaneously getting more and less partisan. And let me just unpack that a little. So, it is getting less partisan in that renewable energy is big business. So if you're a chamber of commerce, if you're an investor, if you stand to make money on your farm by leasing a solar project, if you stand to own a factory, if you stand to all of these things, that's good. That is something, and a lot of the people who stand to benefit in these ways and their elected officials are Republicans. So you would think renewable energy becomes a big business, stands to create greater prosperity. That this is something that makes it less partisan. However, it's becoming simultaneously more partisan because there is this and it's very specific to Donald Trump. This idea of you're either on the team or you're not. And it is very clear that the Trump campaign and the Trump administration has received a lot of support from the oil and gas industry and various entities that have a vested interest in slowing the transition away from gasoline in particular. So if we're in a intensely kind of tribal conflict where it's are you on our side or are you not, that leads to heightened partisanship. And what's really interesting for us as reporters is, so you've got these two factors that are driving things in opposite directions. Who wins? How does this develop over time? I think that uh, if I had to guess, I would think that the strengthening of renewable energy as a big business and as a positive contributor to the economy will eventually. I'm not going to say Trump because that's will eventually overcome the factors that are contributing to it being more partisan. But yeah, that's kind of the reason that we just watch it unfold though and report on it as it's unfolding is we really don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Um, it's almost impossible to understate um, the alignment between Trump and the oil and gas industry. Drill baby drill, and sort of unleashing the LNG imports from the Gulf Coast. I think that'll be a big, big, big trend for us to be covering over the next year or two, will it not, Marianne?
Yes, this is an effort that he signaled throughout the campaign that he wants to increase oil and gas production. And I think one of the stories, one of the questions is, how much can the president really increase oil and gas production? It depends on markets, really. And some of the things that the administration is doing cut against um, increased oil and gas production. No matter how much they roll back regulations, if the companies are hurt by tariffs, if the economy is hurt by tariffs, uh, they're not going to, they're going to see demand going down. They're not going to be drill baby drill. So I think that that's going to be one of the stories. How much can the president really kind of cut against the market forces, which are great and global, um, that really decide on whether the oil and gas industry is going to drill or not?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things we're doing as a staff is looking at um, the I think it's fair to call it a crisis of oil and gas waste that is coming from drill baby drill. This accumulation of billions of gallons of really toxic produced water that comes from fracking in places like Texas and Pennsylvania. Um, um, it's going to be interesting to see, how they dispose of this stuff and whether that's some sort of check on just their ability to drill endless amounts of oil and gas.
Is that a
Um,
limiting factor, really, once you have so much wastewater?
yeah. We also just had a fascinating piece about the methane leakage from the ships taking LNG to places like Germany. Um, Methane being a climate super pollutant, and often not those emissions from the ships are not calculated into calculations about how clean or unclean natural gas is. I think when you track methane leakage from cradle to grave all along the pipelines and transmission stations and so forth, by some estimates, natural gas is dirtier than coal, as both of you have written. Um,
And then there's the question of whether Germany is going to, faced with these tariffs, are they going to take some action against, say, we don't want US LNG if they're not going to be controlling the methane?
right.
And so that could be a trade issue or trade weapon in response to what the president's doing on tariffs. So there's just a lot of complications and implications to every policy, and we're not sure how they're going to play out.
Yeah. Dan, what's a state to watch to get a sense of the future of renewable energy?
The quick and easy answer to that is Texas. It's
That's a
there's
surprise.
just yeah, there's so much happening there across technologies. You could, and and one of the things that's interesting is it's not a microcosm. You could say it's interesting and watch it because it's a microcosm. It's not. It's got a electricity market that's different from other states. It's got a regulatory climate that is in many ways very different from other states. But it's a leading wind power state, a leading solar state. Its battery energy storage market is absolutely booming. With some of the EV production that's taking place there, it's an interesting state. Its state politics are fascinating and I mean, you look at legislation right now where there are attempts to basically harm renewable energy industries and to make it more difficult for development to take place in the state. So it's one of these places where you just kind of strap in and watch just wild things occur, wild progress, wild and setbacks. So more so than any other state. I mean, there are other states that are going to be very, very interesting. I think California sometimes must look at everything happening in Texas and being like, hey guys, we're still a leading renewable energy state too, and they do have a lot of really interesting things going on there, but so much is happening in Texas.
And I guess across the Midwest, it's sort of a mixed bag.
It is, yeah. Well, the Midwest has so much manufacturing. So if the US is going to um, really try to set up manufacturing capacity for some of these renewable energy technologies, a lot of that the Midwest would benefit from that. There's some fascinating examples, like some of what's happening in Michigan, some of what's happening in Minnesota. Indiana's a really interesting state in terms of it being a Republican dominated state government, but also having a lot of activity there related to investment in what you would call advanced energy. So yeah, in fact, Minnesota or the Midwest is a region that you can keep a close eye on to see kind of how the ideological middle of the country. I think if the Midwest stands to really benefit economically, from renewables, then that's really helpful in this kind of larger story of broader acceptance of renewables.
Yeah. Real fast, Marianne. What does your gut tell you about the executive orders aimed at environmental groups? They may not be coming today. They're not on the schedule on Earth Day, but what do you think? Is he going to go that route?
I don't know whether it will be executive orders or maybe it will be IRS enforcement actions against nonprofits. It's significant that the threat is out there. And this is one of really the hallmarks of the administration so far is putting out threats, sometimes taking them back, sometimes having everyone a little bit on edge. And with this feeling that, oh, well, there are deals to be cut, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think there's few of any of the environmental groups I've heard sound like they're in a deal cutting mood at all. They're looking at uh, historic rollbacks in regulation. They're looking at historic cutbacks in the size of the agencies like NOAA, as you mentioned, like EPA. And it's all coming at a time of incredible crisis, environmental crisis, the worst the world has ever had to grapple with. So that's they see themselves as having a really important role at this time, and they're ready to fight.
Yeah, yeah. Universities, law firms, and next environmental groups. All right. Well, we're at the end of our half an hour. I think we could go on for hours more. We haven't talked about environmental justice at all, and lots of other things that are really worth a half an hour unto themselves. Thank you all so much for coming. I want you to know our traffic is up about 100% over last year, thanks to you, and we greatly appreciate your patronage and your reading. And your donations have been up as well, which is tremendous. Please keep them coming. It's going to enable us to, keep the front lines staffed and keep us focused on our mission, which is holding those in power accountable. So thanks very much. And again, happy Earth Day.